Welcome to the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 Sports High School Football Preview Show presented by our friends at Current Electric. I am Mike McGivern. Thank you so much for joining us. So week one of the high school football season is right around the corner. And later in today's show, we're going to roll out this year's schedule that will air right here on My 24, starting August 22nd. Our pregame show will start at 6:30 and kickoff at 7 p.m. I am joined in studio today by the voices of the My 24 Sports High School Football Game of the Week, John Weiser and Terry Kelly, as we look back at the last 15 years of working together and bringing some of the best high school football in the state of Wisconsin right into your living room. So boys, it's good, really good to see you. Let's talk about some of our favorite moments and some of the really good players we've seen over the last 15 years. Let me start. One of them for me was the Catholic Memorial at home at Carroll University against Mugwanago. Mugwanago was the underdog coming into that game. And they were, the first half, they were playing really well. And they had Catholic Memorial on their heels a little bit. And with about 5 seconds to go from midfield halftime, they took a timeout and ran a hook and ladder to score right when the horn went off for halftime. And the Mugwanago sidelines, you can see the air just kind of come out, right? They came out flat in the second half. Catholic Memorial went on to win that game. The cool part for me is 5-6 years later, we're doing a Catholic Memorial game. They took a timeout with 5 seconds to go at half. And I kept saying, I've got something. Down to the sidelines, I said, I think they're going to run that hook and ladder. And they didn't work. But boy, that play for me, Terry, really stuck out as one that I'll always remember. For you, let's talk a little bit about some of the memories and some of the plays that you remember.
I remembered a game in 2014, Brook Central against Brook East, and we've always had fun with that game. They always do a charitable element of it, and it's, you know, a real rivalry. And you think about that game, Central is winning 20-10, dominating. And then as the game wears on, suddenly Brookfield East starts gaining some momentum. And then you get to the fourth quarter. Now you mentioned a hook and lateral, big dramatic play. That's what people think of. Brookfield East hits a 70-some yard touchdown run and a 63-yard touchdown run to come back and win the game 24-20. And it was just kind of fun. It's because here's old-time football. We're going to run the ball and we're going to take over the game.
Did you and Coach Basham watch the second half of that game 50 times? Because that's smash and bash 'em. That was old school.
Well, you got to remember, Dick loved to pass too.
He did.
But he also liked to work things in a series. It wasn't Madden football all the time where you're throwing 72 times a game. And but you know, that was one of those games, especially that rivalry in the city.
Yeah. Hey, John, you and I had talked off the air, and we talked last week about Jed Kennedy, and we're going to get to him a little bit later because I want to talk about Melvin Gordon, who played for Jed. But there was a game that it was a really close game. He was at Kenosha Bradford, and he ran out to see if they got a first down. And we laughed about that because, first of all, I've known Jed a long time. I've never seen him run that fast. And he sprinted to the other side of the field, and he literally got down on a knee to see if they had gotten a first down. And we laughed about that because that high school football coach is very passionate, and he certainly takes that to a different level than he did when he was in this market.
Oh, no doubt. Jed Kennedy is a legend for those kinds of things. And as I recall, I think they called a timeout to the measurement, and he didn't go in the huddle. He didn't talk to any of his players. He did a dead sprint to the far sideline looking at that first down, and he was, like you said, on his hands and knees, microscopically watching to make sure that nose of the football was touching the 10-yard chain. But that's the kind, as you said, the kind of passion that Jed Kennedy exuded both 100%. At Bradford and when he was coaching at Brookfield Central.
Do you know, he for my radio show, he wouldn't call me back. I had not met him in person. And we were doing a game down there, and I was there early, and there was a writer from that area, and there was a radio guy from the area that were standing waiting, and Jed and his wife walked, and I was standing next to those guys, and they were throwing questions to him. And they got done. He looked at me and he goes, "What about you? You got anything?" I said, "Oh, yeah. I raised my hand. I said, "Coach Kennedy, I do have a question." He said, what? And you know the kind of mood he was always in before games. And I said, I just have one question. How did this happen? How did you marry a girl? You've outkicked your cupboard so far. I got to know how this happened. And he goes, whatever. And he started walking. And his wife said, answer the man. I'd like to know too. Do you know that Coach Kennedy has never not picked up my call or called me straight back since then? And he goes, yeah, you showed me you had a little something to you. And I absolutely love that. Guys, before we get to break, I have one other one. Tony McCudden, friend of mine. Look, I coached him in baseball, right? I knew his dad really well, Ron McCudden. And we were doing a game at McGuanago, Waukesha West, Coach Steve Rux against Clay Iverson and the McGuanago Indians. And it was a great game. Went to overtime. McGuanago scores, kicks the extra point. Waukesha West scores, goes for 2. Tommy McCudden gets the ball over the goal line, barely, to score 2, and it was a great win for them. And now in my ear, you guys are going to come to you in 30 seconds, and I've got the player of the game, and it's not McCudden, but I grab him, and he's cheering, and he's going, yeah, and I grab him by the face mask, and I pull him up. And because I'm not a real TV guy, my timing isn't very good, and I whispered to him, your grandfather would be so proud, and Ron had passed a couple months prior. And he went from cheering, he looked at me, and he went, and he started bawling. He had the black stuff under his eyes, and I couldn't get him out of the live shot. And then our TV crew, we had a little bit of a problem with the power at that point. But he was in the shot, and I couldn't get him out. And then we went to a break. I threw it back to you guys, and Tony was standing there. He walked up and goes, what did you say to my boy? And I said, Tony, I said his grandfather would be so proud of him. Well, then Tony started crying. I pushed him out of the live shot. When we're finally done, Karen, right, Tony's wife, who I've known for a long time, came up and said, what did you do to my boys? And I said, here's what I said. She goes, why would you say that? I go, I don't know, because I'm not very good at this, Karen. And they laughed, and it's funny because we talk about that a lot. What a great play. The kid had the courage and the guts and strength, get the ball in the end zone, and then I made him cry on live TV, and we talk about it all the time. 2 great programs, by the way, and we'll get to programs in a little bit. Guys, we're going to get to a break. And on the other side of the break, what we'll do is we'll start talking about some of the players that we have seen over the years and some of the players that have went on to do some really, really good things. And we'll do that again on the other side. Later, we'll talk about the matchups, this year's schedule. And we've got a really good schedule that we're going to roll out. This is the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling Friday night high school football game of the week preview show presented by our friends at Current Electric, only on My 24. Welcome back to the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 Sports High School Football Game of the Week preview show presented by Current Electric, only on My 24. I am Mike McGivern alongside John Weiser and Terry Kelly. They're the voices of the Friday night high school football game of the week. Guys, let's start talking about some of the players, some of the outstanding players we've seen throughout the years. And the first one for me that comes to mind is I want to talk about Hunter Waller a little bit from Muskego. There was a game against Marquette. Sorry, Terry, I know you're a Marquette guy. He was a sophomore, and he made an interception in that game that my jaw dropped on the sidelines. And I was like, did I just see that? And the players from Muskego were all laughing at me going, we see this every single day in practice. This kid's going to be the real deal. Now, he was a sophomore, and Ryan McMillan, those guys were telling me this kid's got a chance to be really good. And I watched him in that game, and he baited the quarterback from Marquette. He let the receiver get in front of him, and he baited him, and then he picked that pass off. And it was an unbelievable play for a sophomore in high school. He's a kid that, we had on a few times. And it was funny for me because his mom the next year, we were at Muskego, and there was a woman there that had all these number 24s all over. And I thought she must have been a big fan of the TV station. Yeah. She was like, no, I'm Hunter Waller's mom. And I like your station, but I love my boy. And just a really good high school, college football player.
Yeah, he was one of those people you watch and you said, oh my.
He's got a
He is
chance.
special.
He is special. Hey, for you and Cooper Catalano, the young man from Germantown, is a kid that really stuck out in your mind.
Well, you mentioned Mr. Walter at being a sophomore. Cooper as a freshman. We visit the schools week before the game, see players, and Jake Davis, coaches are usually very careful about, what they're going to say about a kid. I said, you've got a freshman starting on defense. Jake's face lights up. Oh yeah, he's going to be something. And you could see as a freshman where he was. And we probably had at least 2 more of his games during his career. And wherever the ball was, that's where Cooper was making a tackle. And you can see why the Badgers said, okay, here's someone we're going to target. We want to get in. He graduated mid-year last year, so he had a chance to play spring ball. And, wouldn't be surprised to see him playing this year quite a bit.
I had him on my radio show, and he was a big part of their basketball team.
Plays baseball as well.
Yeah, and the basketball team, he was the kid that defensively took every charge, got every loose ball. He didn't score a ton, but a lot. And I went on the air and said, if I'm one of the teachers from Germantown, I'm going to fail him in a class so that he can't leave early. He texted me like as I'm saying it because he was listening, saying, don't say that. I'm a really good student. Nobody's going to fail me. But the kid, look, for a kid who was a senior in high school to text me during my show and say, we're listening, absolutely not. You better not be calling my teacher, tells me a lot about that young man.
His mother, I believe, is a math teacher at Germantown High School, so there was no room to deviate from a good classroom performance.
At all. Hey, John, you brought up a kid that really jumped off. To watch him play, Melvin Gordon from Kenosha Bradford, to watch him play and to be on the sidelines. And when there was a seam, he hit the seam and he was gone. And he was such a good high school football player. That was a really good one for you to bring up.
Being a Kenosha guy, that certainly was. But Melvin was, you touched on it, smooth. He was so smooth. But when he found the hole, he was gone. And understanding that offense that Jed Kennedy ran, there was maybe 6 plays total off that veer option, split back veer that he was running. So teams knew what was coming and how it was going to get there. It was just a matter of trying to stop him. And Melvin Gordon obviously went on to a great collegiate career at Wisconsin and a pro career. And to see him today where we saw him in the early stages. Now, again, I think we only had maybe 1 game or 2 games. I think it was against Kenosha Tremper.
Yeah, his senior year, he was injured. Right. And he was on the sidelines, and his dad was there. And I went up and introduced myself to his dad and said, hey, I'd love to be able to interview your son. And Melvin was shaking his head like, no. And his dad said, give me a minute. Went and talked to Melvin. Melvin came back and said, I guess I have to do this interview with you. Fast forward a number of years, Jed Kennedy is at Brook Central, and they're in the playoffs, and it was really cold. And I went over and stood on the sidelines to watch the game, and a guy who was all, he had the jacket on, the hood on, came up and said, you remember me? And I looked at his face, and I went, Melvin Gordon, yeah, I remember you. He goes, sir, first interview I ever did was with you. And my dad still rips me about it because I kept saying, and he goes, I'm way better at it now. And I said, if I had a TV crew, I would interview you now, and I'm sure you'd do much better. But he was a kid that you saw it, right? The speed that he had, the shiftiness that he had. When you're on the sidelines or watching him in person, you knew that this was a kid that was at just a different level of some of the kids he was playing. Another one for me, Joe Brunner, offensive lineman from Whitefish Bay. And he was, man, the kid was tough and nasty and on the field. And then when you talked to him, he was just a really nice young man. Hey, sir, thanks for covering our game today, that kind of stuff. Well, my grandson, Logan, who's now going to be a freshman LCL offensive lineman, I was telling Joe that he was playing, and when he would pancake a kid, he'd help the kid up. And Joe Brunner turned from being a nice guy going, tell him not to do that. We don't do that. Us offensive line, we pancake, we add a little syrup if we can by sticking our helmet in their chest. And I said, my grandson's in 4th grade or 5th grade at that point. He goes, I don't care. We start these rules now. You tell him that I told him, you pancake a kid, you look at him and get back to the huddle. You don't help him up. And that will never, I'm telling you, I know exactly where I was. Jake Walter is there too, just laughing, going, that's him. He's the nicest guy you ever want to meet. But boy, super nasty when he's on the field. Terry, there's probably 50 quarterbacks that we could talk about, and for us, we can't bring them all up. But you had mentioned Miles Burkett from Franklin, and what a great player, high school football player he
Well,
was.
Franklin is kind of like quarterback you.
It is.
You think about Max Alba. You, you think about Miles Burkett. Past couple of years, Joey Calais,
Yeah.
the guys that can throw the ball. And Franklin, you talk about programs, and we'll get to that a little later. I know, Franklin just has always had quality over the course of these 15 years. Lewis Brown and his staff.
Right.
You watch one of their practices, and you can see why they're so successful. But Miles, he was just electric. And you knew sooner or later, he might miss a couple passes. He was going to hit a bomb.
And for me, the state of Wisconsin is not known for great quarterbacks, but we've had a number of really good quarterbacks that we've been able to highlight on our Friday night high school football game of the week. And for us to bring them all up, we can't. There's a couple of kids too from Catholic Memorial over the years, offensive linemen at Notre Dame, running back Penn State, and throughout the years, we've always had the chance to do some Bill Young games, and we could talk about 15 guys from Catholic Memorial, along with Muskego and McGuanago. But I thought we brought up a nice group of the people that we remember watching, and me on the sidelines, and then listening to the coaches talk to these guys. And some of the players we talked about were the guys that were running on the sidelines, running the huddle, right? Talking about, look, you have to come up and you got to seal this better if I'm going to make that tackle. And we have been blessed to be able to see some just really good players. Guys, we're going to get to a break. Other side, we're going to continue to look back at some of the really good programs that we've been able to cover here on My 24 Sports the last 15 years. And later in the show, we'll break down the matchups in this year's schedule. This is the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 High School Football Game of the Week, presented by Current Electric, only on My 24. Welcome back to the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 Sports High School Football Preview Show, presented by our friends at Current Electric. I'm Mike McGivern, joined by Terry, Kelly, and John Weiser. Guys, let's talk about some of the outstanding football programs that we have seen throughout the years that we've been doing this. Terry, I'm going to start with you. I know you had talked about Franklin, but we need to talk about them again, and along with a couple other schools.
Well, to sustain over 15 years, we've seen teams rise and fall. But, for consistency, Franklin's one of those programs. I mentioned Lewis Brown before, but two other programs that really have stood out, and a variety of coaches at the one place, McGuanago. They've had a number of different coaches. And then their next door neighbor, Muskego,
Right.
and the job Ken Krause and his staff have done. And, you do a Muskego-McGuanago game, stands are full, crowd is into it. And, you've mentioned players like Hunter Waller and a couple of the running backs that have come out of McGuanago. And it's just the atmosphere. It's like a carnival, and you're seeing tremendous football, and you watch those schools, and, John and I get to see their practices, and you're seeing how they work on those little fine points. It's not just, okay, we're going to do a couple jumping jacks. No. They've worked their offense. Mr. Lucchese, the defensive coordinator in Muskego, has developed an excellent reputation. And so, you think about for the last 15 years, those two programs, Muskego, McGuanago, along with Franklin, who's in the playoffs those last 3-4 weeks?
Coach Knavak knew what he was getting into coming into this conference, because he knew the conference. Coming in, I love asking him, which conference is better? And he's like, well, I'm in this conference. This one's better. But Coach Knavak and his staff done a great job. I agree with you with the three that you brought up, Franklin, Muskego, McGuanago, because they've been at the top and they've stayed at the top. As you guys know, sometimes it's easier to be you're hunting, right? Rather than be the hunted, because now you're everybody's biggest game, and that's certainly Franklin, Muskego, McGuanago. Hey, John, for you, a couple of programs that stick out.
Well, I know Terry coached there. He was part of it, and all the things that Marquette High School has been in the last 15 years. And understand they've gone through two different coaches over that span and still have maintained the high quality of not just the athlete, but the student athlete involved with that at Marquette High School. And I think that's been, and that goes for all positions. We've talked about linemen, we've talked about quarterbacks, we've talked about running backs. How about the kicker the last couple of years, Eric Schmidt?
Yeah.
I mean, here's a kid that I don't think ever had a kickoff return because every kickoff was a touchback. And
I had asked Coach K if I could get Eric to come in studio, but it was during one of their late in the year practices. And he goes, yeah, like, yes, he can come in studio. Just tell him to get his kicking in because we don't really coach that kid. He just goes about and does his deal, and he'll do great at Notre Dame for sure.
And that it tells you something about the staff and what goes on at Marquette to have that type of, I don't know if you call it loose coaching, but to give the young man the opportunity to do his own thing and trust that that young man will get his work in. The other program I think that is worth mentioning, and it's fun that we finally got to do some of those games, was Catholic Memorial, CMH.
Yeah.
People don't understand maybe the backdrop of all this, but with Bill Young, he is everything is in a system. You do this on Monday, you do this on Tuesday. We don't play on Thursday. We only play on Friday. And all the things that we had to go through to get one of those, just to get that one game. I think it was the Mukwonago CMH game at Carroll University. But just to get all the hoops and barrels for him to satisfy him, that we weren't going to try and disrupt anything he was doing. Right. We're not going to invade your practice and write things down and take them and run them over to Mukwonago. But that consistency of that program under one coach for the last 50 years, has worked that program to where it's at, being one of the smallest schools in that conference at the time in the Classic 8. And staying competitive in that league all those years, and then the transitioning out to a couple of different leagues, Parkland the last couple of years with that football-only conference. But just to maintain that status and to go deep in the playoffs every year, injuries aside, everything else, it was next man up with that. And I have so much respect for what Bill Young, Coach K has done over at Marquette and the things that they've done and the athletes that they have produced and the gentlemen that they have produced going on. Because not everybody's going to go on and be Division I. Not everybody's going to make it to the pros.
Right.
But these kids are prepared for life.
For me, guys, a couple that jump out. Greendale is one. When we started this, I think Rob Stoltz was the head coach over there, throwing in warm-ups. And if you talk to Coach Stoltz today compared to what he was back then, right, 15, 16 years ago, he was cocky and he was like, I thought I knew everything. And I don't. And I just enjoyed being on the sidelines watching that team and that program. And that coaching staff, a bunch of young guys that really got after it, and that was fun for me. Another one, and they won a state championship last year, was Swinger. Bill Jacklin is just one of my favorite. He cares a lot about that community. The community obviously cares about him a lot. Last year was a tough year for him personally before the season started, and they went on to win a state championship. And he would always, that day, go hunting with his kids. And so he's like, well, I'm leaving at halftime. I'm going on that. No, you're not. And I wanted him to come in studio with his son. And I said, look, maybe we can get you via cell. He goes, I'm not going hunting until Sunday. I'll come in studio. just one of the guys that cares not only about his players, he's a grade school teacher, loves the kids in that community, loves to be the head football coach. It'll be interesting because now his sons are gone and he's coaching other people's kids, and he loved coaching his kids. And I'm a big fan. Another one that I want to talk real quick about is Grafton. We've had Grafton on a couple of times, and I think they're doing a really good job at that school. We had a game where it was raining cats and dogs. And in fact, I looked up in the stands, middle of the first quarter, there's like 15 parents up there, and that was about it.
Yeah.
And the coach from Grafton went for 2 right away in the second half to get us to a running clock. And I still want to hug him for that because I was so happy that he did that. But Grafton, Terry, is a program, too, that's really kind of come up, and now they've stayed up here the last 5 or 6 years.
The tradition going back to Kip Kramer years ago.
Going old school.
And now, what you've seen them be able to accomplish. And once again, they're one of the smaller schools in their conference and have been over the years. And, it's interesting just to see which programs have that consistency
Right.
and what makes them good.
I agree, guys. We're going to get to a break. Other side of the break, we're going to break down the matchups of this year's schedule, starting with the Arrowhead at Marquette game on August 22nd. And we're going to talk about the first 4 games coming up after the break. This is the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 Sports High School Football Game of the Week preview show presented by Current Electric only on My 24. Welcome back to the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 Sports High School Football Game of the Week preview show presented by our friends at Current Electric. I'm Mike McGivern, again joined by John Weiser and Terry Kelly. So guys, I think we've got a great schedule this year. We think it every year, but I think it's a real good one. And I want to thank everyone who helped put this schedule together this year. Week 1, great non-conference game. We're going to travel to Hart Park and watch as the Marquette Hilltoppers take on Arrowhead. And what a great way for us to kick this off. Terry, some changes over at Milwaukee Marquette.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Coach Keith Lisinski retired. They didn't want to change letters, so John Colley, an alum, is going to take over the program, a longtime head coach over at Brookfield Academy. And obviously, tough act to follow. You've had great success at Marquette. John really understands, though, the whole purpose of the program. And you've got Arrowhead, and Marquette and Arrowhead over the years have had this non-conference game, and there have been some really tight games going back and forth. And they always feel that this is a way for Marquette to see how the season's going to go. I know that Arrowhead, Coach Harris likes to get a challenge in front of his kids. And so it'll be interesting to see. I think, both schools lost some really good players. We'll see what happens, but it's always been one that's a good way to begin the season.
Any surprise to you, Terry, that they went within the family? It didn't surprise me. I think Marquette, if they had somebody, qualified that wanted to come back home, Marquette has that tendency to want to be able to bring people back into the fold and be part of the family again.
Well, I think it's also from the point of view of the person coming to apply for the job understands what he is getting into, and being part of it. But they were certainly going to try to find the person most qualified, someone that would fit within the faculty, and they felt John would be able to live up to those expectations.
You bet. So week 1, we're at Hart Park as Milwaukee Marquette takes on Heartland Arrowhead. John Weiser, week 2, we are state runner-up Muskego at home against Oak Creek. New coach Brian Calhoun at Oak Creek. Should be a really interesting matchup for us.
It'll be an interesting matchup from that respect of the coaches. You've got Ken Krause, who's longtime coach, going into the National High School Football Coaches Hall of Fame this year. Got that call a couple of weeks ago. And Brian Calhoun coming home, as you talk about somebody coming home and taking over a program that has kind of flown under the radar a little bit. Oak Creek kind of got lost, I think, the last couple of years under the Franklin banner. And so I think this is an opportunity now to see what they've done. In the past, we've done the Oak Creek games. They talked a lot about their feeder program. They talked a lot about their freshmen and up-and-coming young players. So we're going to get a chance to see how well developed that young talent is over there for the Knights. And for Muskego, it's, again, the next step forward from, coming almost all the way back in that Division I championship game just to see where that niche is for them. Are they going to still be on that top of that mountain, or are they going to have to climb a little bit more this year?
Yeah, they got hot last year, and they got healthy at the end. They got healthy, and Coach Krause and Ryan McMillan, who's my co-host on the Varsity Blitz show that I do, said, don't count us out. And I did. I counted them out, and they proved me wrong for sure. John, Terry, let's talk about week 3. Week 3, defending state champion Slinger at home against Hartford. Again, they're right next to each other. And the Slinger players don't really like the players from Hartford and the Hartford players, but the coaching staffs are really good friends and for a common goal.
Right.
They've been doing this charity for a long time.
Coaches versus Cancer, both programs have had, cancer affect the immediate folks involved in the game. You mentioned last year, what a tough year it was.
Coach Jacqueline.
Coach Jacqueline, and over the past couple of years, I think both his dad as well as his wife
Right.
lost them.
Coach Redders.
John Redders, has had cancer strike his family, and they really, the whole purpose of that game, as far as they're concerned, how much money can we raise? I think the game almost becomes secondary at a point, and it's always an interesting game. And all of a sudden last year, kind of a change of identity of Hartford. Hartford's throwing the ball all over the place. Wait a second, did Coach Redders get hit by a car on the way to the game or whatever? But it's always been a very, I think, competitive game, but for a cause.
And did you know the sound being on the sidelines of the hitting going on is a little bit different when it's Hartford and Slinger. It just is. And again, the fans are in it. The players got a little chippy at the end of last year, and both Redders and Jacqueline were like, knock it off.
Yep.
Knock it off. That's not what we do here. But it does. And that's a really good game for us to cover.
That's the angle too, is the cancer fundraising that they do for the American Cancer Society. Bitter rivals, as you said, they're, a driver and a 5-wood away from each other.
Right.
And the students turn out, the students raise the money. They have a contest to see which school is going to raise the most money. Just the atmosphere of that game is totally different, I think, than any other game that we do all year, as you said, because the game becomes secondary. It's how much money are they going to raise for the Cancer Society.
For me, it's 3 drives, a 3-wood, a 5-wood, and then a pitch. Just in case you guys are wondering where my golf game is at. Hey, Terry, in week 4, this one's kind of personal for me. A little bit. We'll find out. But we're going to head down to Racine as defending Division IV state champion Racine St. Catharines. The Angels are taking on the Lightning from Lake Country Lutheran. My grandson Logan Bonner is a freshman at Lake Country Lutheran, and we'll see if he gets has a uniform on for that game. But it'll be interesting to see that's going to be in that conference in some of the smaller schools one of the best games in the area.
Well, we wondered how the Lake Country Lutheran game got on the schedule. Now we really know, but it
was me, Terry.
They are rivals. St. Kate's has had a real run of success. Coach Miller has done an excellent job there. And Lake Country Lutheran, that's a relatively young program when you stop and think about how many years ago was it that they came into existence. We must be talking about 19 or 20 years.
Yeah. Coach Braz has been the only coach.
And they've had tremendous success. So that will be an exciting game, and it will be a key game in reality, even that early in the season.
It's our first visit ever to historic Horlick Field.
It's a nice drive for you.
Yeah, it's a nice drive for me.
Nice drive for you, Todd.
But to get into the ambiance of all the games that have been played at that historic site, and we're going to get a chance to air one from the newly refurbished Horlick Field.
Man, great first 4 games. We're going to get to a break, talk about the other 4. Excited about that. So, guys, on our breakdown in the second half, we'll talk a little bit about the next 4, and then we're going to talk about week 9. That's something we're doing that we haven't done forever, and looking forward to that for sure. On the other side of the break, we'll get you the second 4 games on this year's schedule for My 24, the high school football game of the week. This is the preview show brought to you by Donovan Jorgenson Heating and Cooling and presented by Current Electric only on My 24. Welcome back to the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 Sports High School Football Game of the Week preview show presented by Current Electric. I am Mike McGivern, joined by, they're the voices, but the faces today, John Weiser and Terry Kelly.
I just want to say, this is the most FaceTime I think Terry and I have had in the last 15 years.
Well, they're not going to show your faces on this show, guys. They're just going to, they're doing a close-up on this whole bread look that I have. Week 5 this year, Terry, the Blue Dukes from Whitefish Bay traveling to Cedarburg in a North Shore Conference game. Looking forward to that game. Cedarburg, Brian Lear is stepped down, the longtime coach, Brian Lear. New coach, Matt from Kettle Moraine, who's moved over there. Whitefish Bay, Jake Walter, his son's a really good quarterback. He could spin it. Looking forward to seeing that game.
North Shore Conference battle. Jake Walter, one of the outstanding high school athletes in the history of Milwaukee. He paid me to say that. And then you got Mac McDonald moving from Kettle Moraine up there to replace Brian Lair, who had done an amazing job at Cedarburg.
Yes, he did.
And so, once again, it's early in the season, but you're still fighting to get qualified for the playoffs. That's why each of these games takes on a little different angle.
The offensive line at Cedarburg is not going to be right next to you. They're going to move them apart a little bit. You remember Brian Lair. Look, the offense he ran was incredible. You never knew who had the ball, and their splits were none. And I'm a big fan of Brian Lair. I think high school football is better off because he was involved.
And the fact that oftentimes Cedarburg didn't have the numbers that some of these programs had yet. Every year Cedarburg was, doing well, creating some havoc in that North Shore, and Whitefish Bay looking to have a resurgence.
Yes.
And I was honestly surprised that Coach McDonald left Kettle Moraine, because I thought he was doing such a great job with that, resurrecting a program that had some success earlier, and now it's taking it to Cedarburg. So that's the other kind of thing we're going to see, as you mentioned.
Right.
What's the changes both on the offensive and defensive side for Cedarburg?
Yeah, I agree. Again, week 5, Whitefish Bay against Cedarburg. Terry, week 6, McGuanago takes on Pewaukee, and look, that's a nice close one for me. I'm okay with that one. But last time that those two, I think, will play in that conference.
Right. We already mentioned Coach Kadavok and the excellent job he's done at McGuanago. And Justin Frisky, the Pewaukee program, kind of got handed the short end of the stick, being placed in the Classic 8. The numbers just don't add up. But last year they competed very well. They're always going to have, a team that fights to the very end. And we saw that last year. They were playing, I think it was Oconomowoc, one of the last games. And Oconomowoc just had numbers beyond belief, but Pewaukee just kept trying to chip away. And it should be an interesting game because they've got some size back at Pewaukee this year.
Yep. And look, we've talked about coaches, and I'm glad you brought up Coach Frisky, because he really does a nice job. And talk about somebody who's fully embraced that Pewaukee community, those kids. And a Friday night game at Pewaukee is a great venue for us because the whole town comes out, and I really love that. We then go week 7, and John, I'm going to come to you on this one. A crosstown rival. Anytime Brook Central, Brook East, that old cliche, you can throw out the records, but you really can't throw out the records when Brookfield East and Brook Central play. And week 7 for us, we'll be covering that game.
I'm excited to be back at Brook East and seeing this rivalry once again. We just, the last couple of years with our scheduling, trying to put them and fit them into our schedule, it just wasn't working out. But this year it finally fell into a place where we could televise this game. And boy, you go back to the Jed Kennedy and the way that Brook Central was running things there, Brook East and all the tradition there. And I think you talk about a community showing up and turning out.
Right.
They're going to be standing 5 deep around Brookfield East High School watching that ball game. It's just the excitement, the atmosphere, and just seeing this. And as Terry mentioned, hey, that could be for a playoff spot, could be for a seeding spot come playoff time.
100%. I agree with that. Week 8, Terry, and I'm coming to you on this one because I got to believe that you probably coached against these two guys, but we're going to be at Hart Park as Wauwatosa East, coached by Tom Swiddle, Hall of Fame coach Tom Swiddle, against Hall of Fame coach Bill Young from Catholic Memorial. I'm surprised you're not on one of their staffs.
Well, at a certain age, they have to retire you, but this is a game that almost could be billed as a revenge game because last year Tosa East knocked off Catholic Memorial. Now Catholic Memorial had a couple injuries late in the season, but Coach Swiddle and his staff did an amazing job coming into Tosa East, getting the numbers back up. And it should be a very interesting game. And
you know what? And again, that could mean something conference-wise. It could mean something playoff-wise, obviously. And anytime you get a chance to be on the same field with Bill Young and his staff, Coach Hubba now is over at Catholic Memorial. Get a chance to run into him, and then Coach Swiddle and the job he has done. You talk about that resurrection, and I agree with that. the numbers. He started the junior Red Raiders, again, youth football program, instead of combining with Wauwatosa West, and he's done a great job. Guys, last thing before we get to break, I get asked this a lot. How do you guys pick the games? How do you do that? And Terry, I give you a lot of credit because you kind of start the ball rolling. You go through each week, and I appreciate all the work that you do with that. Again, you're retired, so you got all this time on your hands, and you don't play golf, right?
I'm not allowed on most
Not allowed, but you do a great job. And then we, as you know what, John and I get involved, and the people here at My 24 Sports get involved, and we start trying to figure out what we think are going to be really good matchups. And then we try to get conferences and we look at teams, but I get asked a lot, hey, you should come down to Waterford. We'll go, but we'll be back. We will be back. Lake Geneva Badger against Waterford is always a great matchup. But when we finally whittle it down and go, okay, we got it, we try not to get the same team on twice. That, we may have the same team. When we get to the next time and talk about week 9, we may have somebody on. But I thank you, and John, I thank you for the amount of time you guys put in. And then I kind of fly in at the end and go, no, not that one. Let's try this one. Hey, my grandson's at Lake Country Lutheran. Let's get them on.
getting a free burger.
Hey, but notice Marquette is always on there, just so you know. I'm not going to. But thank you so much for the work that you do. And I think this year, every year, this is the best schedule we've come up with. And I think that this year is going to match that.
Now, we try to find games that are going to be competitive. And most of the time, we've been fortunate to have that play out, and programs that have been established.
Yeah, 100%. Guys, we're going to get to a break. Other side of the break, we're going to talk about week 9. We're doing something a little bit different this year with week 9, and I know we're really happy that they've agreed to allow us to do that, and we'll get to that on the other side of the break. This is the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 Sports High School Football Game of the Week preview show, presented by Current Electric, only on My 24. Welcome back to the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 Sports High School Football Game of the Week preview show, presented by Current Electric. I'm Mike McGivern, joined by John Weiser and Terry Kelly. So guys, week 9, every year we've done this, we've come out with a schedule for each week. And we have always said, wouldn't it be fun if we could flex week 9 so that we could say, hey, listen, it's week 4 or week 5. This matchup has got a chance to be a really important game. And now the people at My 24 Sports have allowed us to say, hey, listen, let's flex week 9. And Terry, I know that you're excited about that.
Well, it's just, talk about playing for all the marbles. There it is, conference championships. Who's going to get what, seed in the playoffs? And, sometimes from the flex point of view, there's a team maybe we didn't get on,
right?
They should have been on, and they've emerged, and there they are at the end of the year. Or you've got two teams that have had close games during the season, and boy, wouldn't it be good to see where they are now?
And John, one thing that I'm really happy about with the management here at My 24 is when we brought this up and said, look, there's a chance that we're going to have a team on twice. If you allow us to do this, are you okay with that? They went, absolutely. Get us the best game that we can. And what's nice is because we've been doing this long enough, and when you talk to the people and to pull the curtain back a little bit, for us now to call an athletic director week 5 and say, hey, can we do your game week 9? They know us, right? They're comfortable with us. We've been doing this a long time. And I love the fact that they've given us the opportunity to make sure that week 9 was a really good competitive game.
And Terry hit on it. I think that allows us the opportunity to catch a team that maybe flew under the radar a little bit to start the season, all of a sudden has an opportunity to either win a conference title, maybe they're undefeated, two undefeateds going at each other for a conference title, something on the line. And I think Terry and I have talked about this for years, that makes that week 9 a little bit more interesting, other than trying to line up maybe a 2-division conference title game or something like that.
Or a crossover
game that really doesn't have a lot of meaning. And so this, I think, puts the emphasis on a quality game with something on the line. And again, the community is going to turn out. And that's I can't say this enough in the 15 years that we've done this, having the communities turn out for these games and show up and turn it into a great playoff type atmosphere. And I think that's what we're going to get with week 9 this year, our first week playoff game.
Hey, before we close this up, do you guys think that we should have a little bit more of me at halftime of these games? Or Terry,
Once again, the FCC has certain rules.
look, my wife is like, hey, enough for you at halftime. I want to thank our sponsors, right? I want to thank the sponsors that year in and year out continue to allow us and allow My 24 to broadcast these games. Look, I get people at a gas station that say, hey, 7 years ago, you interviewed my son. Why didn't you ask him this? I'm like, I don't know my nieces and nephews' names. You're asking me about something 7 years ago, but I can't thank our sponsors enough. And the people I get to interview from different companies from around our area, and the reasons that they're at these games, and part of what we do is because I think the people at My 24 Sports do it better than anybody in the market and maybe within the state. And I want to thank our sponsors for allowing us to do this.
And these sponsors aren't just trying to get advertising. They really believe in high school sports. And that's why you love to have this relationship with them. They are part of what makes high school football special.
Hey, a new sponsor we're getting in this year, the AAYFL, the Youth Football League, the biggest youth football league in the state, came to us and said, how do we get involved in this? And I love that. Guys, I appreciate you giving me the time today. This is enough TV time for you guys. Camera's going to be right here. That's all I can tell you. A couple of weeks, August 22nd, we will see each other over at Hart Park. I really appreciate your time. Be sure to tune in August 22nd, 6:30 pregame for the Arrowhead at Marquette game, 7 o'clock kickoff, and Terry and John will have the call of that game. This has been the Donovan and Jorgenson Heating and Cooling My 24 Sports High School Football Game of the Week preview show presented by Current Electric only on My 24.